All right, AP World, here we are once again. I think we're going to continue to imperialize you until morale improves or something like that. And we finished off yesterday and took a look at some uses of imperialism in Africa was our main focus, but also a little bit there in East Asia. And so I'm going to continue with it's kind of like we're doing a tour, okay? And so from there we're going to shift it to Southeast Asia, and here the focus will be on well, like it says there, cash crops. Okay, again, this is any kind of agricultural output that is going to produce money, and in this case, you're going to see some of these areas that maybe not so much having the natural resources that the Europeans need, but instead having crops that can be raised, harvested, and are non-perishable types that can then be shipped back to Europe to be used in those countries, as well as some of it being used to feed the people of the colony itself. Okay, some of this goes back to if we're going to go way back, way back, what was that? Unit 2, Unit 3, the Spice Islands. By the time we fast forward that into the era of new imperialism, though, this is big business now, and definitely the kind of the gem within the Dutch little mini Dutch empire. They don't really have empires that rival those of the French or the British, some of the heavy hitters, but they're in there all the same. And the spices still have some of that demand that they've always had. And so, again, we can think of those as cash crops. Most of those spices start as some kind of different kind of plants that have seeds and, things like that are ground down into spices. And so you have that. And if you look at the map there, you also see a whole lot of other involvement. Okay, I'm focused on the Dutch with the Spice Islands down here in the East Indies, but holy cow, we got everyone else involved. Matter of fact, let's get them in the game here, okay? The French, what they will call Indochina, okay? And I think that's a reference to all this territory that's kind of parked underneath China. And so you're looking at present day Vietnam would be the main one, but I think you also had parts of what nowadays would be viewed as Cambodia, that kind of thing would all make up part of the their Laos would also be in there. Yes, yes, all that making up their colonies there in Southeast Asia. And then, of course, it's not going to be a party if the British aren't involved, and they as well. The British, the Malay Peninsula, eventually it'll be Malaysia, that kind of thing, will be under British control, and with all of them, that cash crop is going to play a role. You will find in some parts of Southeast Asia that rubber trees also exist because of the tropical zone that they are in, and so that rubber demand will also come into play coming out of Southeast Asia. And then my Englishman there reminds me that tea is also a major product that comes out of Southeast Asia, and you try to operate an empire, the Brits. Without tea, and well, it's gonna hit a wall. And so there you go, some big money makers for them, right? Let's see here. From there, we'll zip it on down to Australia and New Zealand. We've already talked a little bit about this before, so I'll just make it really brief. That Australia starts out as a colony called New South Wales. And we talked about that whole idea that trying to relieve the overcrowding in British prisons, in jails back in the day when you could get thrown into prison simply for not being able to pay your bills. They threw people into jails and prisons for anything you could almost think of, and it did result by the time you get into the 18th century of a major crisis for the British, and trying to figure out what to do with these overcrowded jails and prisons that disease breaking out and people dying, and just a terrible situation. And so they established the concept of penal colonies. I think we talked about Georgia colony here in their 13 colonies was one of these, and New South Wales was one. And so some people who were sentenced to go there directly, other people given the choice. Hey, you can serve out your sentence here in England, and I don't know, die of typhoid fever or something while you're in prison, or get tuberculosis. Or you can go to New Zealand and, or New Zealand, or New South Wales, I should say, and you can try your luck out there. And a lot of agriculture, a lot of farming that would go on, especially livestock farming, sheep, huge for a lot of the colonists that end up in New South Wales. Okay, and then do I got New Zealand in here? Oh, okay. Oh, once again, Mr. Floyd's getting ahead of himself. There we go. Let's do this. So just adding a year to that. By 1820 is when you see New South Wales, that name dropped, and Australia being used to refer to that big colony of England. And then we already talked about the Maori Wars and the Haka, all that good stuff. And the British have defeated the Maori more or less by 1839 after the Maori fight to try to maintain their independence on New Zealand. But just as we see examples in the other parts of the world, it's hard to get by the technology that the Europeans have. So yep, you got that going on. Now let's get the United States involved in this. Again, you guys will take a deeper dive when you do some U.S. history next year, whether you take the AP version or not. But I'm sure Mr. Hildebrand will ably guide you through our experience with imperialism. It's not going to be as extensive. I'm not trying to be an apologist here for the United States. We're going to be using our growing power to do a version of the same. There won't be any Belgian Congo stories coming out of this, but there's still, in parts of Latin America, there's still a lot of anti-American sentiment that exists to this day. And, you can kind of look at just recent, events going on, the United States and Latin America, Venezuela, anyone? And to know that there's been a long history of our involvement in Latin America. And while we are not going to just necessarily just kind of go marching in and creating colonies, the United States is going to make use of a lot of what we call economic imperialism in Latin America. And so it'll be American businesses, fruit companies, things like that are setting up shop in different Latin American countries. And then once they're there, if there's any interference with those businesses operating, then sometimes the American government will step in. And so you'll see the use from time to time in a place like Nicaragua, where we send in the Marines to make sure that U.S. business interests aren't being impacted or affected in any negative sort of a way. All right. Anyhow, getting ahead of myself as usual. Before all of that, some people do refer to our whole push, our belief in manifest destiny, that the early United States, was destined to control all the continent from Atlantic to Pacific, and kind of, that there was an element of empire building that's involved in that concept of manifest destiny, and that is kind of the philosophy, the thinking that pushes. When we talk about westward movement and the Oregon Trail and then the negative aspects of that, which is the mass relocation of Native American tribes. Okay, my picture over there on the right side from the Trail of Tears, when the Cherokee tribe was forcibly taken from their lands down in Florida, Georgia area, and forced into what the U.S. government defined as Indian territory out in Oklahoma, would be present-day Oklahoma, and a forced march that through winter months that killed off many of the Native Americans. Forced to relocate by the U.S. government. And then, the history, which I think I'll touch on here in a moment. So I'm trying to get too ahead of myself. Maybe not. But, the whole history of the Indian wars that are fought out west between different tribes like the Apache and the Comanche and the Sioux to gain control over lands that they had. That either were lands that we wanted for settlement for farmers coming from back east, or because gold had been discovered, like in South Dakota, places like that. So, you have a whole history of I mean, very similar to what we see the Europeans doing, going to war with a native population to gain control over resources and land. All right. It's kind of, same basic concept. Just we're doing it within our own borders, which, kind of makes a bit of a difference there. Monroe Doctrine that I mentioned, that's kind of connecting back with what I was talking about with Latin America. And 1823, James Monroe, president at the time, that's when he makes the rather bold statement, because we're still a pretty young country at that point, letting Europe know that the Western Hemisphere was closed for any kind of imperialism business. That was the tiny little U.S. government at that point. I mean, we had a tiny little army, a tiny little navy. Yeah, we didn't have much to stand on, but us announcing to Europe that if any of them tried to come over to the Western Hemisphere and colonize, like the Spanish had done before and how the French had done before, that there's no more of that. And that if anyone tried to do it, they'd be dealing with Uncle Sam. And for as young as we were, it was kind of a hollow threat. But, Europe decided maybe they didn't want to test it, or they were too busy with, creating their other empires elsewhere in the world. What else do I have in here? Oh, another little dip into the world of imperialism. And this comes in 1898 when when the Monroe Doctrine was announced in 1823. It was really not what we would call retroactive. In other words, if there were still some presence of colonization from Europe existing in the Americas, the doctrine pretty much said, well, you can stay, but no new colonization. Okay, I should throw that little caveat in there. Well, fast forward to 1898, and Spain still is hanging on to a few colonies here and there down the Caribbean. Cuba is still a Spanish colony. Same with Puerto Rico, right? Those are kind of the two major islands. And the United States is kind of growing weary of, still having these remnants of European colonization left in our hemisphere. And so in 1898, the United States, you'll learn more about this again in U.S. history. We kind of create the conditions to go to war. We end up with one of our battleships pulls into Havana Harbor in Cuba and mysteriously explodes, and that gives cause for the United States to end up declaring war against Spain. And not only do we go after Spanish colonial holdings left here in the Western Hemisphere, but we also go after Spanish colonial holdings in the Pacific. And the Philippines will end up coming under U.S. control as a result of the Spanish-American War. And so that will be kind of part of, again, our experience with imperialism. Okay, and then the Roosevelt Corollary. This is kind of picks up where where Monroe Doctrine leaves off. After we defeat Spain and scatter what remains of those European presence over here, the Roosevelt Corollary pretty much says that not only is U.S. government have the right to step in to prevent foreign countries from trying to attempt to colonize in the Western Hemisphere, interfere with the the inner governments of countries over here in the Western Hemisphere. But Roosevelt takes it a step further, and to say that the United States also has the right to involve itself in the governing of Latin American countries if what is going on in a Latin American countries presents a potential risk to the United States. Okay, which you heard a little bit about the Roosevelt Corollary with our recent little adventures with Venezuela, and so that is the United States at that point, pretty much saying, hey, Latin America, you may be a bunch of independent countries that operate, complete, you're sovereign, you have your own autonomy separate from the United States, but if there's anything going on in your countries that we think could drag us into problems, we have the right to step in. We have the right to send in our military. We have the right to do whatever we see fit. Okay. And that also fits into, again, it's kind of imperialism light, because we're not properly just going in. It's like, all right, we're taking over. But we're setting up the conditions to potentially do that if we decide we want to. All right. And so we lump that also into a little bit of some imperialism. All right. Okay, let's shift over. And during all of this time frame, what the heck has Russia been up to? Well, Short story. They've been doing a lot of trying to get into the imperialism game, and a lot of trying and not a whole lot of succeeding. Um, they do try to establish colonies around kind of the what we call the North Pacific Rim. Here, let me get this in here. There we go. And as a matter of fact, establishing outposts along the west coast here of even the Americas. I think they get as far down as the northern part of California, and they have these kind of little outposts set up. In the end, none of them make it. Too much competing pressure from the British, the Spanish, eventually the United States itself, and so poof, they're gone. They hang on to present day Alaska, but then in 1867 they sell it to the United States, and so whatever dreams they have of trying to create some kind of North Pacific empire goes nowhere. They also try with Central Asia and Central and really kind of going down even into parts of Southwest Asia. Russians have this kind of this dream, and this kind of goes back to not so much maybe Peter the Great. I guess I'd lump it more into like maybe Catherine the Great, and and wants these expansionist policies. I mean, she also dreams about the North Pacific, and again doesn't go anywhere. They also have these ideas of possibly being able to push into gaining territory that could eventually gain Russia access down to the Indian Ocean. But some of that would require having to push into places like Afghanistan, okay? And that's going to put them on a crash course with the British, who are also down in that area. They're already establishing themselves in India and South Asia, and also are beginning to push their influence around in other parts of South and Southwest Asia. And while the British and Russians will never go to war over this, they do kind of play this like kind of game of almost kind of like of nerves with each other as they try to jockey for position and see who is going to end up being the big power in that part of the world. But like I said, in the end, the Russians are going to be denied there as well. So yeah, for the most part, Russia is going to be kind of cut out of the imperialism game. Okay, all right. Here we shift gears into section 3 of unit 6, and we look at responses to all of this expansion. So we just took this deep dive into all this imperialism that's going all over the world, European countries, the United States, okay, all these different powers that are getting themselves involved. And this section really just deals with, okay, so we have all this imperialism happening. How are the people that this imperialism is happening to? How are they responding to it? Okay, they're just rolling over and said, "Oh, you got too many guns and too much technology, and we're at your mercy." Do they fight back? What exactly do they do? And so here we're going to get you all kinds of examples, of course, of some of these responses or reactions. Okay, and we are talking about these indigenous native populations that are being conquered by these imperialist powers. All right, and so I'll start you off with one that takes place against the Ottoman Empire. All right, and no, the Ottoman Empire was not a big imperial power, but we'll lump this in with these these reactions to empires. And I want to mention this one because it's a little bit more foreshadowing for Unit 7, and so. In the Balkan region that has been under Ottoman control for, by this point in time, centuries, we start to see uprisings in the 19th century and then going into the early 20th century. These will be successful. We kind of talked a little about some of this before. It's going to be, Bulgaria, Romania, Montenegro. They're going to win their independence. We talked about, Greece is broken away already. We'll get Serbia is also broken away. So, the Ottoman Empire just losing almost all of this territory that they had down in kind of Southeast Europe. is bit by bit is being taken from them. Flip side of that is that, and this happens sometimes, when with the Ottoman Empire gone from that part of Europe, it does create a weird kind of what we call a power vacuum, where it's kind of unclear who's in control here. Are we just going to see the birth of a bunch of little new nations? Are we going to see maybe a new, bigger nation form up out of this? And in that power vacuum, we are going to see a lot of tensions created amongst, Bosnian people and Serbian people and Croatian people and Romanian people. And it's going to be a lot of these. Whoop, I got a dog revolt. Hold on. Sorry, small dog uprising. They were having the canine response to my state expansion, apparently. Anyhow, no, I'll remind you of that when we get into Unit 7, because those ethnic tensions down there in Southeast Europe are going to play a huge part in bringing about the start of World War I. All right, so again, a little bit of that foreshadowing. Okay, let's jump down to some examples of resistance coming in the Americas. So we talked about that Indian removal. Okay, first of all, tribes that were east of the Mississippi that are forcibly removed by the U.S. government and pushed out west. And with the thinking being that, they're out there, we'll call that Indian country, it'll be theirs, we won't have to worry about it. But then, comes westward expansion of that, a rapidly growing country, the end of the Civil War, and, and a huge push of more settlers who want to claim land out west and and populate, and a United States government that wants that to happen, to make sure that that we cement our control over the entirety of our boundaries in here in North America. And so that Indian removal, it then begins to take on different dimensions. Sorry, getting ahead of myself once again. It takes on different dimensions out west here. Eventually we have the establishment of the reservation system out in the West, where these tribes are given these designated plots of land where they can locate themselves to clear more space for again for settlement. Okay, there's going to be some of those tribes who are going to the Cherokee would be an example. They resist forcibly for a short period of time, but by the time you get to the Trail of Tears, they realize that they can't fight against the power of the U.S. government, and so they submit and they march west to resettle themselves in Oklahoma Territory. Other tribes will fight back harder. When I mentioned the Apache, the Comanche. Hold on here, but those tribes I mentioned, the Sioux, they're going to fight fierce wars against the U.S. government to try to hang on to their land. And one by one, though, they will end up falling defeat. Again, it's a version of what we see play out in Africa, in parts of Southeast Asia. It's just we're talking about native indigenous populations that do not have either the technology or the numbers that these governments are able to bring to bear when it comes to militarily vanquishing a native enemy. Okay. And then my other example there with resistance in the Americas, I'll try to keep this short, but a very bizarre little story that happens around the time toward the end of our Civil War, 1860s. And what we have happen is the French government decides they want to get themselves involved over here in the Americas again. They understand the Monroe Doctrine, they get that, and so they're trying to find a loophole. Okay, I mean, aren't we always trying to find those shortcuts, those loopholes? And they do so by trying to set up a French emperor, Maximilian, you see pictured over there, a French emperor who is going to take control over Mexico. I mean, while the rules say that no European countries can come over and colonize in the Western Hemisphere, it doesn't say anything about bringing over one of their people to rule a Latin American country. Anyhow, it's a bizarre little story, and it doesn't end well. I think it ends up with Maximilian up against a wall, facing a row of rifles executing him. But I guess we would call that an example of the Mexican people resisting an attempt to imperialize, kind of in a backdoor approach by the French. Okay, like I said, a strange little story, but there we go. Apparently worth mentioning. All right, let's get into back over to India. Oh, we talked about the sepoys just recently here. That private army of the British East India Company, to make sure that that the British East India Company's authority in India was undisputed. Okay, in 1857, those sepoys revolt against the British. The story behind it is another kind of one of those little bizarre ones from history. Hold on here. Sorry, I'm having the scratchy throat syndrome. I keep having to pause to cough. The way this works is the sepoys, like I said, private army of the British East India Company. They are uniformed, armed, trained, the whole 9 yards by the British East India Company. Okay, but they are Indians, and so the bulk of the sepoys religiously are either Hindu or Muslim. Okay, they come to find out that the paper cartridges, all right, that they use in their weapons. They come to find out that and these are supplied by the British as well. All right, okay, so the very rifles that these soldiers are carrying, that the cartridges are made of a paper that, to protect them, waterproof them, are coated in grease. All right, just not any grease though. It's grease that comes from the fat of cows and pigs. Right, it's kind of distilled down, and then these cartridges are treated in that. Problem with that is that that is and these soldiers are trained with these old weapons they use, that they tear these cartridges open with their teeth in order to pour the powder down the barrel of their guns and to prepare them for firing whenever needed. Okay, which means that you're asking these Hindus and Muslims to put their mouth on the fat of a cow or a pig to tear this cartridge open. In effect, you are in a way getting them to consume cow or pig fat, and these are religions that is big time taboo. All right, and they begin to believe that this only goes together like a conspiracy theory breaks out amongst the sepoys, that the British are somehow like secretly doing this because they have this grand plan of converting them all to Christianity, or that kind of an idea. And the British don't do a very good job of damage control here, and before you know it, the sepoys rise up in a major revolt. And it takes sending in British troops in large numbers to put this revolt down and to get things under control in India. It is a major turning point, because it is with the end of the Sepoy revolt that you see the establishment really, and what is left of the Mughals is swept away with this. And this is the establishment of what comes to be known as the British Raj, which is that reference to India now becoming a full political, just not economic, full political colony of the British Empire. And as I've mentioned to you, I think before, very, very quickly will become the crown jewel of their empire, their most valuable, their most important colony. But that word Raj is just a reference to the British colonial government that will hold power in India for about the next 90-ish years. Okay, let's see, where are we going from there? And so let's talk about some more resistance. Okay, so fast forward about I guess about 25 years later, and the creation of the INC, the Indian National Congress, led by one of the early leaders is a very young there, Mahatma Gandhi. A British educated Indian, all right, goes to British colleges and becomes a lawyer, ends up working for the British in South Africa, in their colony of South Africa. We'll talk about that later on, how the British would had no problems with kind of taking some of their colonial subjects from one country and helping them to operate another one of their colonies elsewhere, different continents, that sort of thing. But Gandhi gets a front row view of imperialism both in his own country and in South Africa, and and comes out the other end with this has got to be a system that has to be ended. And so the INC is going to be a Indian formed organization that fights to regain Indian independence, to get the British out, and for India to become an independent sovereign nation. Okay, will take them a while to get their goal taken care of, but it starts in 1885. All right. And let's see, should I take it any further? Let's just take care of this one and call it good, okay? Some Southeastern Asian resistance, and that is that we will see in Vietnam, even beyond there into Cambodia, Laos, we will see that what the French will refer to as rebels who rise up to resist French control in there. And, just proof that, while we were talking about King Leopold and the Belgians and, and the Congo, that, that just, just the worst of the worst. Don't ever pretend that, that magically makes the rest of the Europeans some kind of angels in the way that they operated their colonies. If you take a close look at that picture, or don't take a close look at that picture, I wouldn't blame you. Those Frenchmen are proudly posing around the heads, okay, decapitated heads of rebels, literally fighting for nothing more than their freedom, their independence from French rule in Vietnam. And it's going to be the same old story, same old story, where the French are able to crush resistance with superior firearms, superior firepower, and it's just another version of it going on there. Okay, all right, we'll hit the brakes there. We're at 32 minutes. When we jump back into this together, we've got some more of this resistance that we're going to we are going to keep kind of spinning through it. You'll have no shortage of examples of how people pushed back against imperialism, because it is going to be kind of a general rule that really nowhere you look where imperialism goes is anyone just going to just instantly roll over and say, you got us, do your worst. Okay, just kind of human nature. We want to fight back. We want our freedom. But I'll give you your freedom from notes at this point. All right. Till next time. See ya.